This is Jim Williams with the Hurricane City Tropical Update video for September 2nd, 3 p.m. Here's the graphical outlook from the National Hurricane Center as of 1:30 p.m. this afternoon. And we have 3 systems out in the Atlantic and a 4th one coming off Africa. Let's go ahead and talk about them. Katia out here east-northeast of the northern Leeward Islands, moving off to the west-northwest, and the system should go north of the Caribbean Sea, head northwest, and then eventually dip off to the west here briefly, and then in the end this will turn off the east coast of the United States and head out to sea without probably affecting anybody, although the Canadian Maritimes could still get affected by this. And we also have Tropical Storm Lee in the Gulf of Mexico. We have the system Invest 94L up here south of Nova Scotia moving off to the northeast, and we have a new system coming off Africa out here that could be the next Invest. We'll keep an eye on that. But neither of these systems are in really favorable environments right now for rapid development or anything. But Lee is going to be the big story due to the rainfall potential for the northern Gulf Coast as it moves slowly inland here over the next couple of days. All right, here is the HurTrack program showing our motion of Tropical Storm Lee. The system drifts north and then eventually north-northeast. Our current feature is Morgan City, Louisiana at Hurricane City. We can get all the latest localized information as Lee moves in. Forecast to make landfalls around 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm on early Sunday morning, and then it'll move northeast through the southeastern United States and probably out into the open Atlantic. We hope we don't see much rain out of this for the northeast, although we're still seeing whether the models are going to indicate that's going to happen. It looks like now the models are leaning toward this going into the southeast and then maybe exiting out into the Atlantic and merging and or following or leading the Hurricane Katia to go out into the Atlantic as well and miss the United States eastern seaboard. Let's hope all that happens and all this kicks on out, because they really don't need any more problems up in the northeast. We have over 40 people that have been killed from Hurricane Irene. And by the way, we do have the archive up from Hurricane Irene from the Hurricane Warning Show, and that is available to archive subscribers on the front page of Hurricane City. Basically a smorgasbord of everything that happened, news reports, ham radio reports, VoIP Hurricane WatchNet, live chaser cams, live webcams from the internet, and on and on and on as Hurricane Irene made landfall in the Bahamas and the eastern seaboard. Check that out on the front page of Hurricane City. Anyway, this is the motion of Tropical Storm Lee, and let's see what the hurricane hunters are showing out there right now. They've been flying around out there this afternoon, and they originally classified this earlier today, and 2 p.m. advisory, they upped it to a tropical storm, but really the winds aren't that strong out there. We're finding winds right around, 20, 25 miles an hour near the center, and flight level winds are just barely over 40 miles an hour, so it's just barely a tropical storm. Not real well organized. And if anything, it's drifting off to the west a little bit, according to the hurricane hunters here. We'll see if that motion is just a relocation of the center of circulation, which is more than likely. But here's the LSU water vapor loop, and this will tell us a lot about the future course of Lee and Katia. And let's go ahead and stop this. Now, the green areas, the dark shaded areas, are dry air, and the moisture is where all of our tropical systems are. Let's start with Lee over here. And Lee is a very kind of a lopsided system, a very broad circulation here to the west of the center of circulation, fairly common for Gulf systems that are developing. And what we have is the system drifting north. We have a ridge out here beginning to build in the Midwest, and if you follow the edge of the ridge, it takes to a trough out in here, and then we have another ridge out in the Atlantic, which is what is steering Katia off to the west-northwest. So our weakness is right in here. And there's strong high pressure north of Katia, and that's why Katia is Lee rather, is stuck down here in the Gulf of Mexico. And Lee should just slowly move off to the north, but not very fast because of that high pressure ridge. But eventually there's a little scoop coming over here in Texas, and that's going to move off to the east and take Lee here and shove it off to the northeast. Now the question is it going to go up the eastern seaboard and give them more rain up in the northeast, which they do not need because of the aftermath of Irene and all the flooding, or is it going to just head out here into the Atlantic and enhance the lower pressures out in here, which would drag Katia also off the east coast of the U.S. and eventually northeast and out to sea? That looks like the most likely possibility based on the models. I'll show you those in just a minute. But it looks like a very heavy rain event for the entire southeast here, so be prepared for that. If you have a vehicle in a low-lying area or you live in a low-lying area, you might want to pay real close attention to your local weather service office and your local news and tell you if you should get out of these areas. Now, there is a state of emergency and a lot of warnings up for the Gulf Coast from heavy rainfall. Now, this did happen before back in 1997. Let me show you some past storms, and here they are on the Lee Hurricane History page. Now, this is we have a page for every grid in the Atlantic Basin, and this is for grid number 73, which is a grid just south of Louisiana. And this shows all of the systems that developed in this grid and became hurricanes and hit land. There's only 6 of them going back into the since 1871. Only 6 became hurricanes that developed in this location and hit land. The majority of them headed towards Galveston, Texas. So this is uncharted territory for Louisiana if they were to get a hurricane out of this. Now, there's been plenty of tropical storms that developed here and just moved inland as tropical storms. But back in 1997, a system developed here in about the same location as Lee and eventually became a hurricane heading towards Mississippi and dumped well over 20 inches of rain, up to 40 inches in some areas in Mississippi as this moved inland. Mississippi and Alabama got pounded by really heavy rain back in 1997 from Hurricane Danny. Let's hope that doesn't happen. It does not look at this time like that's possible, although we do have to keep an eye on this system. All right, here is the upper level winds from the University of Wisconsin, and you can see upper level wind shear around 20 knots over our system, Tropical Storm Lee in the Gulf of Mexico. I believe this is part of an upper level low is the way it looks to me. Like this is a kind of a hybrid type of a system. It's going to have a lot of hard time getting developed here with such a broad circulation. And it's a large system, and I'm going to show you a sea level pressure anomaly map of the world and show you how low the pressures are in the Atlantic Basin. And this is why we're getting such large tropical systems this year. But look at it. This is a really large tropical storm out here, and it's going to take a long time to consolidate like we saw with Hurricane Irene. So I don't expect this to become a hurricane, but it's going to be a heck of a rainmaker because it's so large and moving so slow. So anybody in the southeast here is just going to get drenched. And then, of course, we have wind shear over Katia out here as well, 20 and 30 knots of wind shear. But the system has maintained, regained some intensity overnight and regained hurricane status here today. And the system, as it moves off to the northwest and west-northwest, it should find itself in a more favorable environment out here. So this could still ramp up into a major hurricane. But again, due to that trough out here, I think there's a pretty good chance this is going to steer away from the United States eventually and out northeast between Bermuda and the U.S. So we'll watch that closely. But this could still ramp up into a significant hurricane. Here is the Canadian model. The Canadian model yesterday showed this getting real close to the Bahamas. Still shows it today, but the difference is there's more lower pressure up in here, and that's this is going out 5 days, of course. And this is Lee over here, enhancing, lowering the pressures along the eastern seaboard, which should help to steer Katia here off the eastern seaboard. That's what we're hoping anyway. And that is the Canadian has shifted a little bit in its model thinking, breaking down the high pressure a little bit. Now here is the ECMWF, the European model, shows generally low pressures all up and down the eastern seaboard over here, and there's the window between a high here and a high over here, so the system has no choice but to turn off to the north, and that's what's forecast from the European model. Now here is the GFS model, and this is going out about 6 days, showing it well east of the outer banks of North Carolina and beginning to make that turn to the northeast. And I've had some questions from people and some comments about 9/11, the anniversary coming up from 9/11. It looks like by the time that comes around, this should be pretty much a done deal. This is not going to hit the U.S. In fact, should be heading away from the United States at that time, so it should be clear skies, or at least tropically speaking anyway, for the 9/11 ceremonies. We don't expect anything up there at 9/11 unless something unforeseen happens and the system gets trapped down in here for days and days and then eventually moves off northwest. That could be a problem, but right now the models don't seem to think that that's going to happen. Here is the no gaps. This has been the left bias model on this, as well as the UK Met, and notice it keeps ridging in place here up over the northeast, but not real strong high pressure. The high pressure remains back over here, so there's still an outlet for the system to slowly drift off to the north. And it'll be interesting to see if the UK Met and the no gaps pushes this a little further west. We'll see in future runs here, but the models are kind of leaning towards the turn of the north, and I think that's what's probably going to end up happening here. Here is number 13, former Lee, from earlier today from the GFDL model, showing landfall in around Intracoastal City, Louisiana. And this is going out 60 hours, about 3 days from now, 2 to 3 days, as a 60-mile-an-hour tropical storm. And here is the HWRF interpolated, the HWFI model. A little further west towards Cameron, Louisiana, maybe, has the same thing, around a 50, 60-mile-an-hour tropical storm. So the tropical models have a left leaning on this system, and the global models want to take it towards eastern Louisiana. So we'll keep an eye on that. Now here's that global anomaly map I was telling you about. Let me zoom in on this a little bit. Notice here in the upper right-hand corner, this is the Atlantic Basin that I'm circling right out here. Notice the deep, dark purple colors. Those are really low, below normal sea surface pressures. And when you get pressures like that below normal, you usually have larger systems. We saw that with Irene, and we're seeing it with Lee. And we may see a couple more really large systems before the hurricane season ends on November 30th. So we're going to watch for more large systems, but not necessarily stronger systems, but larger systems. At least that's what we've seen so far this year. So anyway, Irene did get up to a major hurricane, by the way, while it hit the Bahamas. So it can produce major hurricanes as well as being large hurricanes. So we'll keep an eye on this the rest of the hurricane season. Anyway, that's it for now. Take a look at that archive if you're an archive subscriber. That supports Hurricane City. We appreciate that. There's a lot of work in editing that file down. It's about 70 minutes long. It's 320 by 240 pixels. Kind of a small video. But if you enlarge it, it's going to be all pixelated and unwatchable. It's better to watch it in a small format. You'll get a smorgasbord of what happened for Irene. And this is basically for archive purposes. Down the road, maybe a year or two from now, you could look back at Irene and kind of see how it went down on the internet. So that's why we do these archives from the hurricane warning shows, and that supports Hurricane City, and we do appreciate the support. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you again for visiting Hurricane City.